Welcome to Manga's Seal YouTube channel. The previous video link is on the description box or on the top right card. Volume 15, The Half-Elf Godkin. In the first place, he didn't have anything of value to say because he didn't know what work the Alraunes had been given or how they were being handled. Understood, Your Majesty the Sorcerer King. Isn't its etiquette amazing for someone who is supposed to have lived in the forest? Ainz praised the monster's sense of propriety. When and where did it gain this knowledge? Was she trained by the twins? Or somewhere else? Or though how it was speaking might carry such nuance, perhaps in actuality it was speaking in a more Alraunes-esque manner. For example, it could be saying something like Ainz is a very big bud. It was good that they could communicate with each other, but Ainz wondered whether this disconnect might create any problems. Well, it wasn't like he really cared about being called a big bud anyway. And so, Ainz looked around the field of flowers. He thought that the Alraunes were obstructing the view a bit, but at least, everything else was still as he remembered. With a barely discernible smile, though his face didn't move of course, he briskly turned around, trying to look as stylish as possible as he twirled his robe. Or his pet Fenrir and its Samna were waiting for him there, along with Lumiere. After he started walking, Or quickly fell in step and inquired, "Is it fine to leave it at just that? Will you grant an audience to the other Alraunes?" "No, that won't be necessary. I saw what I wanted to see. Now, can you take me to those elves?" "Understood." Or replied, and together with Or, Ainz rode Fen through the 6th floor. Soon they were nearing their destination. Looking up, they could see the slightly misshapen tree that was Or's and Mare's residence, peeking through the branches of the tall trees. After a few seconds, they were clear of the forest and a meadow spread out ahead of them. In the center of the meadow stood a stout tree, whiter than it was tall, with its overgrown branches casting shadows across the ground. Standing before an opening in the trunk of the tree was Mare and the 3 elves that waited on him. There was no doubt they were there to welcome Ainz. He didn't know when Or had found the time to contact Mare, but if it had been immediately after he had arrived on the floor, he might have kept them waiting for quite a while. It wasn't like he had promised to meet them at a fixed time, so Ainz didn't have any reason to feel guilty. But, well, suppose that Ainz was a branch manager and got a call that the CEO traveling all the way from headquarters had just arrived at the nearest railway station. He, too, would have immediately gone out to wait in front of the branch office. It was inconceivable that he wouldn't prepare welcome. With that thought in mind, it could be said that Ainz was at fault for not giving them the exact time he would be coming over. Ainz wanted to say that he was not at fault because he hadn't thought of that point until he had already arrived, but could that really be considered a legitimate excuse? He wasn't sure how long they had waited for him, but he knew that if he said, "You didn't have to wait for me," he would have nothing to say in response to the rebuke that he should be more mindful of others' feelings and the position they were in. Mare was in his usual outfit, while the elves were wearing plain fatigues, which some may consider to be enough for them. Ainz would have preferred if they were better dressed, but since Or and Mare had decided that it was good enough, that was not something he could say. Also, Lumiere and the other maids would probably be displeased if the elves were to wear maid uniforms. The regular maids were quite proud of the fact that they served Ainz. He had heard from Sebas that while maid candidates from the outside would not be bullied directly, they would be indirectly bullied by not being taught how to properly perform their duties and so on. They probably wouldn't mind much in this case, since the elves acted the part of maids serving Or and Mare, but he couldn't be 100% sure. Besides, they might not like the elves wearing the same uniform as them. The maids think of their uniform as battle gear. The Fenrir arrived before the 4 people waiting there. "Thank you for coming out here to welcome me. I am very pleased with the depth of your loyalty." Before dismounting the Fenrir, Ainz took the initiative to speak first. He had considered waiting until Mare had greeted him first, but decided that this approach would leave a better impression. "Thank you very much." Smiling, Mare bowed his head, with the 3 elves quickly following suit. "Good." Ainz pumped his fist mentally at the apparent good start he made and looked at the elves after they raised their heads. All of their faces, no, their entire bodies looked stiff. The elves gulped as they received Ainz's stare. Whichever way you looked at it, all of them were too tense. The question was whether it was caused by fear or something else. In other words, whether this was the fear of imminent death for appearing irreverent or the tension one felt when they met a famous person. Just in case, Ainz checked if he was releasing his Or. He was not projecting any hostility or killing intent towards the elves, so that shouldn't be the cause of their fear. This is unexpectedly troublesome, though it went smoothly until now. Opponents tended to be sensitive to the emotions of strong beings like Ainz, and end up getting dominated by fear. In a certain sense, this was like getting read by the opponent, so he also received various pointers during training with Cocytus to prevent this. On the other hand, Ainz himself couldn't sense the killing intent of others. He forced Cocytus, who loathed the idea, to direct killing intent towards him, and did end up feeling some pressure. However, he was not sure if that was the thing known as killing intent. Perhaps the undead were just not good at sensing those kinds of things. The undead were completely immune against mental effects, so perhaps sensing killing intent could be counted as a mental effect in a broad sense. That said, Sheltier could sense it just fine. Cocytus said maybe increasing one's ability as a warrior makes it easier to sense such emotion. Ainz thought to himself that he should probably include learning the ability to sense such emotions as one of his future goals. Perhaps it was just that Ainz was too thick-skulled to sense such emotions. Oops, too many pointless thoughts. Mare started speaking at the same time Ainz started collecting himself together. You see, about Ainz summoning to meet the elves today, is something the matter. Although Mare was more timid than usual, it seems like he had already heard the details from Mor. This made things easier. Ainz shifted his gaze from Mare to the elves with an exaggerated movement. The elves turned to look at their feet like they were trying to escape his gaze. They were visibly trembling. However you look at it, this was not born from being tense. This is probably from fear. Are they still on guard even though they have been subordinated to a pair of dark elf children? Honestly, after pledging their loyalty and living here in peace all this time as the living, it would have been great if they understood that this undead is different from the ones they knew. Well, my appearance is like this. Even if their minds understood, it would be difficult for their hearts to accept. In this world, the undead were said to hate the living, and were considered to be the enemy of all living beings. So it was only natural for these elves to be on guard and tremble in fear at the undead being in front of them. Maybe their reaction would have been different if they lived under Sheltier, and got used to the undead, but there were barely any undead on the 6th floor, so there was nothing they could do about this. Seeing something once is more effective than hearing about it 100 times after all. It was the same in Yggdrasil. Techniques categorized as player skills were easier to understand by seeing them directly, in contrast to just getting a verbal explanation. Of course, he also needed to practice it a few times, no, hundreds of times later to learn it himself. Yes, that's right, Mare. I want to ask one simple question of those behind you. Elves started to breathe shallower and faster. They didn't need to be so afraid, Ainz wanted to say from the bottom of his heart. Of course, he couldn't just say nothing to Fear in a cheery voice. He couldn't break his character of Nazaryk's ruler, Ainz Ulgaun, but it would be troublesome if they didn't feel at ease. You don't have to worry so much. I didn't come here to harm you. He wanted to continue with so be at ease, but stopped after thinking that even he wouldn't believe it if told so by a fearsome being. Even if the CEO invited them to an informal gathering, he would doubt there would be any employee who would ignore their status that easily. Bothersome. Well, he knew it would be a bad move. He suddenly felt like casting dominate. It was because he was not confident he could cajole them or make them feel at ease. One would remember what they said and did even after said magic ended. Furthermore, the use of mind control magic is considered barbaric in other countries. He didn't know how elves saw it, but they certainly would not find it to be pleasant. In fact, if someone did that to anyone from Nazaryk, even Ainz would wait for an opportunity to kill them. Of course, Ainz wouldn't hesitate to use it to gather important intelligence. If anything, he would even be willing to cast control amnesia without a doubt. But there's no need to go that far in the present scenario. It's not like he was sure they did something bad or was hiding information from him. Zen, Beru. It was different back then. If I used magic to get information that I could easily get by talking to them, it would cast out Sonora's and Mare's abilities. The twins, no, everyone in the great underground tomb of Nazaryk, had undying loyalty towards Ainz. They believed that whatever he did would be correct, which was a dangerous way of thought in his opinion. That's why he should not try to give the impression that he was dissatisfied with their work as much as possible. He could not fathom what such a misunderstanding could lead to, plus it's not like he was dissatisfied with their work. If he was going to use mind control magic, he should have done that in the first place. He didn't do that when they were initially captured because he wanted to make them allies through goodwill. He wanted to position himself as their savior. Considering such an investment was placed in them up till this point, using mind control magic to force them would be short-sighted. First of all, this isn't the place to have a conversation. Let's move elsewhere. If he was not confident in opening their hearts through words, he could just use a different method. First, a change of place. In that case, let's go upstairs. Please do that. Ainz turned his gaze upwards, towards the giant tree. How is this place as the venue for their conversation? In a certain sense you could call this the elves' home turf, so wouldn't it be easier for them to talk here? But if they did that, who was going to prepare the drinks? Would it be Aura and Mare? No, it wouldn't be an issue if Lumiere came along, did that. Not bad. In the end, the only difference is whether the conversation would take place in a harmonious or tense atmosphere. Whether they would open their mouths out of goodwill or out of pressure. There's not much time left. Weird, even though I have already prepared presentation material and simulated their questions and responses, like I did in the Dwarf Kingdom and the Holy Kingdom. Am I getting a bit out of touch lately? He was invited by the other side, so he should reply as soon as possible. Unfortunately, he would always end up overthinking in such situations. Speaking of which, I never saw the regular maids providing the guests with drinks, without orders. No, they did it once, maybe. There was no way they didn't prepare the drinks. When Ainz ordered them, before, they immediately provided a choice of drinks. So they were probably stored somewhere in Ainz's room. The regular maids were working themselves hard every day to become the perfect maids. It was hard to think that they would forget or were just insensitive to such needs. So it meant they probably thought that since Ainz the ruler did not drink, then the others shouldn't as well. It's similar to how it was awkward for subordinates to take a drink when the CEO didn't.